Okay, let's get started. So thanks everybody for being here. A little lighter crowd than last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess, but that's okay. It's a Friday, so you never know. People could be out enjoying themselves. Um, Couple brief updates before we get into the questions. I know we had like a decent amount of questions this time versus the last call, so we're going to dive into those quicker. First is we'll have a UI update out early next week that has the links to the Curve V2 ETH token pool, as well as a link to the Convex pool to stake those LP tokens. And then we'll have a little Medium article that comes out that explains that if you're not exactly familiar with that process. And then the other thing we wanted to lightly mention, although we don't want to kind of give a concrete timeline yet, but we're undergoing a full UI revamp, which we're very excited about. Although, again, we're not exactly sure of the exact timeline because there's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to getting everything right. But we will keep everybody updated on that front. And with that, maybe we'll get into some questions. So the first question is, does the team have an estimated timeline for when pairs can be deployed to Curve V2 pools under the Pro mode?
I'll start. I can start on a high level, and then Bruno and others can chime in. So the punchline of this is in the next several weeks, we should be able to get this started. Maybe you can give either Cody or Bruno, et cetera, could give an update sort of on the audits and contract side.
Yep. So we have the Curve V2 contract ready to go out to audit. And once that's there, we have just a kind of a small change to integrate it into our kind of liquidity calculator, and then we should be good to go.
One thing I'd add into here is there's a kind of technical backend, pretty kind of straightforward milestone or infrastructure we need to put into place. And as we look at adding dexes and pools in general, there's a kind of economic design and analysis that accompanies each one of these new pieces of technical infrastructure that we're putting into place. And then those get married with some UI updates as well. So there are a few pieces here that will come together as you start to see new options for liquidity directors in the short term and in the long term.
I do gloss over a fair bit.
Okay, cool. Anything else to add to that? Bruno, were you going to say something?
No, it was Manuel. Sharp just pinged me. Can you do a mic check, Sharp? No, I think he has Boomer muted himself somehow.
Boomer muted. Sometimes Discord changes my preferred mic setting, even despite default. So you might need to go into settings. We just dropped. Let's see if we can get him.
Yeah, I think he's trying to hop on his mobile.
So I can't invite him to speak now because
there he is.
It's like the Discord stages keeps freezing on me. The UI. It's weird.
There we go. Sharp, can you hear us? If not, we can go on if he's still having problems.
Yeah, Sharp, just check your user settings, make sure that the input is correct, the correct mic. Sometimes it changes. We can move on to the next question while we're waiting for him to fix his boomer mic scenario. This was one from Reggie, our MVP for question asking. Can you explain the thought process behind a Balancer V2 being the first alternative DEX that you plan to focus on?
Yeah, I'll kick off this one. So it's actually not the first one, or at least not the first exclusive one we're focusing on. So like we just talked about, Curve V2 and Balancer V2 are both sort of in the audit process. Curve V2 actually further out the pipeline than Balancer V2. But in general, I think the 80-20 sort of profile of Balancer V2 gives a different liquidity profile versus a lot of the other AMMs out there. That is interesting. And so between a Balancer V2 80-20 and then all the interesting things that are coming out with Curve V2, these are sort of interesting new approaches or towards liquidity that might have a better, sort of more sustainable profile versus a lot of the V2 stuff, where probably most of us on this call understand a lot of the drawbacks to the V2 model. Other things on our side to share on that?
Only clarification, Uni V2 were the unprofitable challenges rather than the Curve V2.
Yes.
We might have been ambiguous there.
Yes, good point. Yeah, all V2 is not the same. So yeah, the Uni V2 Sushi V2 model is what I was referring to when I was saying some of the drawbacks that are inherent in that model. Curve V2, Balancer V2, Uniswap V3 all are, obviously have different profiles and how they're deploying liquidity.
Yeah, and I might just add, like, just generally speaking, in these like kind of, so to speak, like newer types of exchanges that have like more kind of, I don't want to say like more advanced, but like more complex or additional tokenomics, such as like Balancer now with V2 or Curve V2 with the Curve ecosystem, that they offer us, like, you know, also they open up the door to like other streams of revenue that we don't have on, you know, just like a Uni V2 or Sushi Swap. So I think that generally speaking, in the future, these exchanges will become more and more important.
Okay, cool. I think Sharp's mic is still fucked, but we'll keep moving on. What is the ETA for decentralized reactors? I know we've had this question before. It was mentioned in previous calls that we might do a core 4 before decentralized reactor spin up. Is this still the case?
Yeah, so for the core, I'll kind of start by talking about the core 3 reactor spin up. So we're doing something a little bit interesting for at least one of the core 3 reactors that we're working on getting established. This is going to sort of have an intersection with how we're thinking about decentralized reactors, and we're calling it an experimental reactor. Bruno, on your end, do you want to share as much as you want to share about this one?
Yeah, so there's kind of, we've been thinking a lot about like the decentralized reactors, and I think we have kind of a more or less like working model for this. The current thinking is that we might, in the nearer future, start out with like 1 or 2, so to speak, like experimental reactors with protocols that Manuel could like say something to that. But
yes.
like can you, is your mic
Can you guys
now?
hear me now?
Yeah, no,
yeah, we got you.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
fine.
So the current working model is that we are in the near future, we might be spinning up 1 or 2 experimental reactors, we're going to call them, that will allow us to like kind of step into this like more decentralized model of spinning up reactors in a kind of like trusted way with like protocols that will be very interesting to collaborate with.
Yes,
also, like, you know, for other reasons that Manuel might get into.
Yeah, and additionally, we are also exploring other sources of revenue. So there are strategies that can be implemented with new reactors where trading fees by themselves aren't the end goal. And with the merge coming, I think that it's very interesting to start to consider how to essentially take advantage of staking derivatives. So I think that's all that we can say for now in terms of what we are exploring in terms of strategy. But that's the end goal. And again, sorry for the mic. I finally understood what was going on, and it was a retarded boomer mistake.
Yeah. So, and what another thing that I might add in here is that at least me personally, the way I've always been thinking about like this more decentralized way of spinning up reactors would be like, you know, that there's still this aspect of governance or like community involvement, right? So that it's not like, you know, just fully free for all. I like to kind of compare it, like in the way I conceptualize it is more like getting a curve gauge approved, right? So it is potentially possible for everyone to do so, but it requires, like, you know, a little bit of an effort in terms of like reaching out to the community, discussing like pros and cons, and then going through some kind of governance approval.
And something that I would add is that we are also very much focused now on the profitability of said reactors. And this might be also interesting point to introduce eventually something that has been discussed, which is the slashing component. And all of this is going to come together in the future, and that's part of the rationale.
Great. Yeah, we had some interesting conversations on the last Capcom call about Reactor spin-ups and governance. It's cool stuff. Okay, next question. Can we get an update on protocol revenue? Also, there's been chatter in the Discord about updating Dune or some other place where we can see accurate revenue that includes rewards in all forms, tokens, trading fees, etc., broken down by venue. Example, B3 curve.
Yeah, so we, as most people probably know, we post the protocol revenue on the dev channel up on every rollover. And as the observant person might have seen is that this does not include trading fees. So we've been basically just reporting on the rewards. So the actual system revenue is higher than what has been announced so far. We're exploring like ways to be more accurate with this, and also like are thinking about like maybe representing this directly in the UI. What a little bit of complexity here is like kind of that there's like some finer points to like reporting this revenue, because as most people will know that the trading fees, for example, for any given pool, they accrue inside of your LP position. So we'll have to think about like how specifically we would want to like present that information, right? Because as you know, as the liquidity, for example, stays deployed, right, this ratio might shift. So yeah, but we're working on it, and also like on the Dune end. Dune is I think a little more fickle than most people are aware of in terms of accuracy.
And Bruno, you probably don't know off the top of your head what the revenue's been over the last like couple of weeks.
I mean, we've been the stuff we've reporting was between 70,000 and up to like 100K, I think, on some occasions. Sam might have some input on. I'm sorry, firefighters. Sam might have some input also, like on the kind of the revenue from trading fees and like kind of that it's not as straightforward to report this.
Yeah, I don't have exact numbers. I mean, I know trading fees range from, in our reactor, in the pools we're deployed to, they range from, I think, about 25 to 30% on the high end and 2 to 5% on the low end, in terms of just, if you're just looking at the trading fees, not the IL portion.
Yeah, and at a high level, like what Bruno was saying, you can see a good amount of this, at least in the protocol-owned assets, adjustments on the Dune dashboard, which I think we have some changes that are going through there. But still, yeah, 80 to 100-ish K a week. And we have some methods for increasing that in the very near future here that we're exploring every week. Other thing is we're getting quite close to having, I think we'll get to a question on this shortly, but sort of emissions under revenues, which means then we'll be running this in sort of a net profitable manner. So.
Okay, great. On to the next. This is a question from Justin. Don't know who Justin is, which Justin. As we approach ACC in the fall and the project moves to V2 tokenomics, i.e. revenue greater than emissions, there is no longer a need for 100 million total coins. Has the team started to explore the idea of permanently burning some of the undistributed coins that are no longer needed in this new paradigm?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. So it's definitely an interesting point or question. In general, once the emissions are underneath the revenues, it won't be net new emissions, which I think is kind of what Justin's getting at here. It can be a portion of the revenues then that are used to purchase and distribute the token. So I think here there's just sort of the question of what does it buy us? It's definitely like an option available to us. And when I say what does it buy us, what I mean by that is if the DAO treasury itself owns a large supply of Toka, which it does, then it effectively means that the Toka holders are already sort of benefiting from that supply that's sidelined as the Toka holders are the owners or runners of the DAO, and the DAO then owns that Toka. But it's definitely something that we can explore once we get there. It will be sidelined, so not counted toward circulating supply anyway. So something we can think about. Sharp, Bruno, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's pretty much my thinking. Is like, I mean, it's an option, but it has to be like, directly backed by like a specific kind of goal, which I don't.
I believe that. I believe that it's net positive for Tokemak itself to have the optionality of the treasury, right? So as long as the treasury is sidelined, even if we do not require those emissions, it's useful to be able to use them in the future for strategic purposes.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Moving on to the next question from Reggie, the man. General updates I'm always interested in. Any delays we should be aware of? Updates on the DAO. Do we still maintain high confidence in maintain a high confidence level in ACC September?
So currently have no delays in general, and we will have updates on kind of expected timing of the various portions of Tokemak V2 here in the near future. So the ACC Toka, the changes in profitability parameters that we've already started to roll out, but that we have more things that we're going to be rolling out. We'll be continuing to talk through this, as well as things that aren't really a part of Tokemak V2. So the different liquidity distributions to Curve V2, Balancer V2, etc.
Yeah, and on the DAO side, I might add that we've had I think kind of the captain's calls have kind of turned into kind of DAO discussions, and I don't know what the status is, but I'm personally always still very interested in spinning up a forum. And
yeah, we've been looking into that. We've been looking into getting Commonwealth together, which I think Craig and I will connect on next week and see if we can revisit that and see if that's something we want to move forward with. Next question, any updates? We've had this one a bunch. Any updates on L2 deployments or considerations, specifically optimism, giving away grants for developing? Any consideration for trying to obtain a grant?
I can take this one. So I'm not sure if you guys have been looking into the OP grants, but as it stands, there is an interesting proposal from Curve for a 1 million grant. And my take on this is that if it doesn't make sense strategically for Tokemak, in terms of the overlapping reactors and venues that we have to deploy that liquidity, then it doesn't make sense to pursue that. Now, taking this into consideration, the deployment that, in my opinion, still makes the most sense, it will be Arbitrum, simply due to the fact that we support many overlapping projects that are also deployed on Arbitrum. And that is definitely something that will happen in the future, but after we consolidate in mainnet.
Thank you, Sharp. Next question, how does Tokemak complement with new developing protocols like Bond Protocol, who hopes to solve both concentration of liquidity assets and liquidity mining incentives?
So this is interesting because it's an old question. We really like Olympus, right? And Bond Protocol is a spin-off from Olympus Pro. And this is something that Carson has answered in the past. So these are very different approaches to liquidity. In one model, you are bonding your governance token in exchange for, let's say, ETH or USDC. In our case, especially in the current model, the protocol will essentially loan their assets and we market make with the quote side. And at the same time, there is the flexibility of having this network of liquidity where voters choose where that liquidity is deployed. So ultimately, it's just two different approaches. And there are some really interesting developments also from Olympus, not just on the Bond Protocol side, but also on the peg stability module that they are working on. But again, ultimately, as Carson has stated, it's just a different approach for protocol and liquidity. And it can make sense to actually have both.
Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely things I can totally agree with everything Sharp said. And then there are definitely things that can sort of stack together as well. So if a protocol is trying to get access to more ETH or other tokens, then they can use one of these bonding mechanisms. And then again, at least for the feature set that thus far has been released within Tokemak, it's all about like getting assets into Tokemak with which it can then pair with the other pair assets and deploy as actually trading market liquidity in underlying venues, which of course is pretty different than how the bonding program for Olympus works. Not to say that anything is better.
I lost you, Carson. I'm not sure if I was the only one.
Yeah, I think I lost him too.
Where was I at? Must be my connection.
I think you were nearing the end of your statement, but
what part did you guys lose me on? So it must be my connection.
So that's like 10 seconds.
I don't remember what my last 10 seconds were, but I think you guys get the gist. I think I was just saying then that it's different, obviously. So as right now as Tokemak, you're putting assets in, you're pairing it with other assets, deploying as usable liquidity. That's something that doesn't happen in a bonding program at Bond or Olympus. That's not to say one or the other is better. They're just different. They can definitely be stacked.
got it. Next question is the team currently exploring or pursuing any potential future protocol partnerships that integrates with the value added by Tokemak?
Yeah, I can take that one. And it kind of like goes into the next question. Because generally speaking, I've mentioned this before, like it's not perfectly wise to like always basically on our end disclose like every single protocol we're talking to, and there's like plenty of them. Just for the reason being that, some things are just like exploratory, so it's like, it would be like not fair to like just even like tease these things, and other things are like strategically kind of important, so you want to like kind of get your ducks in a row first. What I can say though is that we're like recently like personally very excited about someone we're talking to in terms of UniV3 market making basically on there. So like active liquidity management on there. And then, as some might know, some of our team members might have been in Paris, so there was like also a lot of talking with other protocols and potential collaborations.
Yes, and I don't want to go off topic, but taking into consideration the current discussion on UniV3 turning on the fee switch, it's going to be interesting to see what's the outcome there, because it can alter some of these decisions, in my opinion. Right now, they are exploring fees on just specific pools, but I know that many large LPs and active liquidity management solutions really do not like this decision because the margins are getting tighter, but definitely interesting for us too.
Yeah, this next one is still kind of tied in, but I do see it get asked quite often. With regards to the UniV3 integration, people often reference that Gamma had created an audited an integration with Tokemak that hasn't been used yet. So I think we've answered this question before, but are there any plans to use it or move to Gelato, which I think is another solution? I don't know if we have more to add there, but Craig.
I can answer broadly on these, and it fits into the UniV3 generally speaking, is that we spent a lot of time over the last, 6 months, 9 months, speaking with a lot of the providers that are looking at automated UniV3 strategies. There are some trade-offs in different approaches between all of these. I think at the end of the day, as you've heard us talk about turning on new exchanges in general, a la Balancer V2 or Curve V2, we're hyper focused on profitability of those deployments. And at the moment, UniV3 is a tough environment for mid and low sort of volume tokens. And all of these providers we've talked in depth about what kind of strategies might make the most sense given tokens with the liquidity profiles that Tokemak supports. And just right now, it would be tough for us to make UniV3 kind of our next DEX to turn on. I think we're going to get there. I think there are going to be some smaller, simpler steps that we take prior to that. Balancer V2 and Curve V2 being pretty straightforward examples there. But we're always looking at this and in discussions with many of them, including the Gamma team.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the added parameters and variables, not only once you determine how you're going to flow into Uniswap V3, so via something like Gamma or some of the other things out there, like not only that choice, but then also within it, all of the different sort of extra layer of dimensions with it means that something like a Curve V2 or a Balancer V2 is something where you can get to some of these new models, many of which are showing like much more promising sustainability and profitability metrics without having to go through such a huge parameter set. So that's why it makes sense to do a bit later in the process.
Yes, and also some considerations in terms of IL management in 80-20 pools that are worth to emphasize. And then we also need to take into consideration the tokenomics that are associated to each single one of these venues, because as everyone knows, trading fees are a main component, but there are other ways to realize revenue. And I should just add that even in pairs that have really low volume, there are ways to make them profitable. So that's another thing to take into consideration.
Great. The next question comes from Sir Reggie once again. Can you go into a bit more detail about the dev updates regarding the Curve V2 pool update? Tokemak currently controls 40% of the pool and it is now in an adequate position with Curve emissions while restructuring token emissions. So maybe Sharp, if you want to go.
I can touch on that.
Strategy.
So initially, given that we controlled all the liquidity that was deployed on that pool, there was a very interesting strategy of essentially just arbing the incentives that we were directing there. And Quest, for example, it was a possibility to essentially incentivize liquidity there with bribes and just make that delta, right? Taking into consideration that now we only represent 40% of the pool, we get to a stage where it makes sense to incentivize this migration and start to just readjust emissions accordingly to the migration that occurs from, for example, SushiSwap to Curve V2. Regardless, it's just to expose the yield opportunities that exist with Toke to Toke holders, and we'll just rebalance accordingly.
Yeah, and I just might stress here again, because I think there's a question that often comes up and like people worry about it. There's currently no plan of fully sunsetting the sushi pool, right?
Exactly.
That will stay here. It's just basically kind of a rebalancing between the Curve V2 and the sushi pool. So I think mid to long term, you can expect to have like similar size liquidity, similar yields on both of these pools, right? But it's going to end up being like kind of a matter of taste of like what the LP wants to yield, right?
Yeah, and interesting thing to add here is that even though we did not incentivize any kind of migration to this Curve pool, we are actually less than 40% now. So the pool has 1.4 million in TVL. We have around 500,000 deployed there. So a lot of these LPs, they either acquired Toke to explore this yield opportunity, or I saw also on the pool contract, some of them migrated from SushiSwap, and this was without Tokemak incentivizing any kind of migration to the pool. So regardless, it's always a net positive for the protocol, because it either represents demand of people that had to acquire token on the market to get exposure to this yield, or people that just decided that they preferred the migration to get a higher yield on Curve V2.
And here I might add is that often you can think of like people just farming this pool, but like another aspect here to these Curve pools is that this cannot result in like additional sell pressure to tokens, since the yield is like Curve native.
Yes, this is just CVX, and SDCRV that was captured by us, and it doesn't entail any kind of sell pressure for token. And we might even have some strategies in the future where, without disturbing this APR, we still try to arb those incentives, but that's something for the future.
Yep. And again, to reiterate, that's the UI update that's coming early next week. We'll, on the Tokemak front end, we'll have a easy redirection to the curve pool. So probably expect more people to start taking advantage of that. Great. Thanks. And the last question, which Reggie thought may be too complicated to answer for the state of the reactor call. But I would love to understand more the usage of how you were thinking of rebuilding liquidity deployment to the market using EIP 2535. And I think Cody can probably handle this.
Yep, and I'll try to keep it short. Cut me off if I start to ramble. So we have two main goals really with this move. It's to reuse our functionality that we have interacting with all the different dexes, and to be able to move this liquidity in a single transaction without leaving any dust behind. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that we do fairly often right now is we move between Uni and Sushi. And sometimes you don't always know kind of the exact amount of tokens that you're going to get back when you're withdrawing liquidity and then moving it somewhere else. We always know a minimum for sure, but you always have a little more. So right now we can get most of the liquidity over when we do a move, but there's always a little bit left behind, and sometimes we have to do it in 2 transactions. By moving all of our functionality into this diamond pattern, we can start to kind of compose those different operations in kind of more complex manners, and kind of save us those extra transactions, save on that dust, and really get things moved kind of as quick and within as few transactions as possible. We've been kind of simple so far, just a couple dexes, but as you start to introduce more and the voters start to move their votes around more, it's just going to get more complicated, and we're kind of trying to get ahead of it to support all that.
Can't wait for those diamond patterns, baby.
Shiny, it's pretty and new.
Okay, cool. Diamond patterns. Yeah, that's right. Well, that's all the questions we had. I think we could probably wrap this call up. We'll have another one again in 2 weeks, which we'll announce the date. I want to thank everybody for joining. We have this recorded, so we'll probably get this over to Tradium, although he might have recorded it himself. And then we'll get this posted on Tokebase. Thanks again for the team for joining. Thanks for everybody for being here. We love you, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Talk to you soon, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank everyone.
See ya.